Today, let's talk about why you should never install electric fans in your car or truck. Okay, so let me back up here. A few years ago, I lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. I drove a 1995 GMC Suburban. I had a child and a wife, and it was the middle of summer. My AC seemed to work just fine as long as we were cruising down the freeway at 65 miles an hour. But as soon as we pulled up to a stoplight, that AC turned into a swamp cooler and did not work at all. We were getting hot, musty air coming through those vents until that light turned green and I was able to mash that gas pedal. Yeah, it was bad. So what did I do? Probably what most people would do. I threw a set of electric fans in this truck to try to cool things down a little. See, my thought process on that was, hey, maybe the clutch fan just isn't spinning fast enough while we're sitting at a stoplight, therefore not pulling enough air across the condensing coil and not cooling everything down, making the air conditioning system not work and yada yada. So I did it. I put the electric fans in and I was stoked. But there was some downsides. At this point, these fans have been installed in my Suburban for a few years. So I have a pretty good perspective on the pluses and minuses of electric fans. So first, let's talk about reasons why you might want to install electric fans. The first reason I'll start with is extra horsepower gains. A lot of people think that when you install electric fans in place of your clutch fan, you're going to get a noticeable horsepower and torque improvement. And in my experience over the last few years, I'll have to say, absolutely, that is true. I didn't realize it when I was first getting these fans. My main concern was cooling this beast down. But when I took it out on its first test drive after installing these fans, I did tell a noticeable difference in my power. I noticed that the overall engine noise was a lot less because the fan wasn't spinning with the motor when it wasn't needed. I also noticed that as soon as I pressed the gas, I could feel the truck just pick up a lot quicker, a lot more power. Now, what does that translate in terms of dyno numbers? I don't really know. I mean, is it 10 horsepower? Is it 20? Is it 40? I really don't know. I couldn't tell you on that front. What I could tell you is that I would never be buying electric fans solely for the purpose of increasing the horsepower rating of my motor. It's just not such a huge difference that I'd be willing to spend all that money to do that. Now, there may be instances where that might actually be worth it. The instance number one would be you can find a set of electric fans and wiring and all that stuff for a very, very good price. But I would say for the average Joe, the average garage mechanic, I wouldn't think that it'd be worth it to buy a brand new set of electric fans like mine solely for the purpose of increasing horsepower. Now, if you're looking for increased cooling, I can say that these things work phenomenally well. Like I said, I've had these in this truck for years now. I've traveled, I've towed trailers, I've driven thousands of miles across country. They've never let me down. They never failed. My truck never overheated, never even came close to it. And I was towing a 6x12 trailer full of my stuff. I mean, full. Up hills and everything, and it never skipped a beat. The truck always stayed cool. Even when those temperatures started to climb up, it would never get to the red zone. These fans work, and I can attest to that. Okay, so another reason, you just want some more space under the hood. It is true, you get to get rid of the factory fan shroud on top, which might add like a foot of space here that you can actually see and get down to the pulleys and all this stuff, you know, when you're changing belts and pulleys and all that good stuff. And last but not least, let's talk about the cool factor. I'm gonna give this a 10 on the cool factor. These fans are awesome, they sound awesome. When I shut my truck off after they've been running at full speed, they still run until everything cools down to the correct temperature, and then they shut off. So I'll shut my door, lock the car, be walking away, and you can still hear these fans rapping out, which I think sounds kind of cool. It's also cool when you're sitting, you know, for example, at a stoplight or in a gas line at Costco or wherever, and you have no sound, and then all of a sudden your fans kick in, and you can tell that they're really good electric fans because these things sound smooth. So the cool factor is definitely there. Okay, so let's get to the point of this video. Let's talk about the reasons why you should absolutely never, ever install electric fans in your vehicle? Well, the number one reason I'm gonna point out is simply the cost. Unless you can find a really good set of used fans or a single fan system maybe that is very, very cheap, I'm gonna say when you invest in a brand new setup for electric fans, the wiring and all that stuff, as well as possibly someone else to install it, and that's not even talking about the extra upgrades that are gonna be needed to make these fans run properly. It's not gonna be cheap, guys. For example, your stock alternator most likely is not going to be up to the task to run a system like what I have under the hood. I have the flex-a-lite 280 dual electric fan system, and those suckers pull 30 amps. And that might not sound like much, but trust me, it is. You see, most alternators, like the one that came stock in my 95 Suburban, is a 105 amp alternator. Now the problem is that rating is not a hot rating at idle. That's most likely a rating when you're traveling at freeway speed and that thing is spinning really fast. In my experience, my stock alternator had tons of trouble keeping up with these fans. When I would sit at a stoplight, I could see my voltmeter going all the way down into the red zone, which tells me that it was not producing enough amperage to run these fans when it was hot. So what did I do? Well, of course, I stepped up my alternator amperage and I thought, okay, well, let's take 105 and let's add 30, that's 135. Let's go for a 140 amp alternator. I have to say, I made a mistake there. 140 amps still wasn't enough. I was blowing fuses and it just wasn't enough to keep up because, again, alternators most likely are not rated for hot idle. What I found is after dropping another chunk of money on what I thought was a much improved, bigger, better, badder alternator, which it was, I have to give the alternator credit, it was definitely better than the original, it still wasn't enough. So that just adds to that cost factor of this whole system. What I would recommend when you have a set of fans like I have and they pull 30 amps, you're gonna need like a 240 amp plus alternator. And the reason why I say that is, again, the hot idle. The main issue you're going to run into is when you're sitting at a stoplight, your engine is sitting there at idle under load because it's in drive, and you have your fans running at full speed in the middle of summer, everything is burning hot. You're going to be hard pressed to find an alternator that will be able to push that kind of power. Okay, so we got cost out of the way. Now let's talk about just the extra upgrades that are going to be needed in general just to get this thing working right. You're going to need extra wiring, you're going to need thicker wiring, you're going to need better wiring for your grounds and going from the alternator to the battery and all that good stuff. You're probably going to need to do the big 3 upgrade, which means more investment into bigger, thicker, fatter wiring all the way around. Of course, you're going to need that alternator I was talking about. Those things are not cheap. You're probably looking in the $300, $400, $500 range for a really, really nice alternator that you're not going to have to worry about. And then, unless you're installing it yourself, you're going to have to pay someone to install this thing and potentially work on it as you try to figure out and get the bugs out of the system. Let's talk about potential issues of the system. The biggest thing that I was faced with was popping fuses. You see, these fans pull 30 amps, so I had a 40 amp fuse in the system, and I was blowing those fuses, melting those fuses. It was a disaster. You see, my alternator simply couldn't keep up. At hot idle, I'd be sitting at a light, and that alternator would be trying as hard as it could try to keep those fans running at top speed. Everything got really hot, and fuses would either pop or completely melt altogether. So I ended up stepping up to a 50 amp fuse and a 60 amp fuse, and same things would happen. Fuses would just melt. The plastic on those fuses would literally melt and deform completely. You couldn't even tell it was a fuse anymore. I had a time when I was sitting in a Starbucks drive-thru with my wife. We were gonna get a coffee. It was middle of summer, it was hot, AC was blasting, and the fuse blew. And what do you know, my car started to overheat. There was a car in front of me, cars behind me. I couldn't move. I had to shut the thing off. It's boiling over. It was a nightmare. We're burning hot in the car. We had to pull out into the parking lot finally, only to find that the fuse was not only blown, but it was also melted, and it was a bear to get out of there. But of course, once I replaced it and got on the road, everything was fine again. So that just about does it, guys. Those are pretty much the reasons why you would never want to install electric fans in your car and truck. I mean, we're talking about cost. We're talking about extra items needed, which adds to the cost. We're talking about more complex system because of those extra items. We're also talking about potential issues you can have, and there are plenty of them. So for the average Joe, I would say, in my opinion, you might want to stay away from electric fans. It's just too big of a headache, especially on something like your daily driver, and especially on one that your wife drives with your kid in the car. Okay, so where does that leave us? Let's talk about what you might want to try instead. If it were me and I could do it over again, I would probably try leaving my stock clutch fan attached to that motor, making sure that the clutch is working properly. And then I would go to, Craigslist or a junkyard or something and find a good used electric fan. That way you can try wiring that thing up and just adding it to your system and see if it works, see if your alternator can run that. And if it does, you'll get extra cooling and you'll still have your stock fan. So even if that electric fan breaks down, you're not going to overheat and you're not going to cause very many problems. We got all that out of the way, so let's let's talk about my electric fans specifically. I'm gonna show you what they do and how they work. First off, you can see the fans are installed right in front of the radiator, just where the old clutch fan used to be. You can probably also see my rat's nest of wiring, and that is because I didn't want to cover it all up yet. I was having specific little issues and I had to keep working on the wiring, making sure that everything was correct. I rewired that whole section over there. So even though this kit was fairly custom and it was meant for my truck, you can see it still takes kind of a little bit of ingenuity to figure out how it all goes and make sure everything works right and put everything, you know, kind of out of the way and all that good stuff. It was great because my system came with new shrouding up here at the top, a way to connect everything, gasket from the fan to the radiator core. It came with everything. So the install was awesome. Now on the flip side of that, you can see I have a lot of zip ties here holding everything together, making sure things stay out of the way. You can see right down there, I actually had an issue where the lower radiator hose was touching one of the fan blades, or at least getting uncomfortably close. So I just grabbed a whole bunch of zip ties and zip tied it to that metal line there. And so far, it's actually been good. Not the prettiest thing in the world, but hey, it worked. You can see the fuse that I was talking about. This one right now is a 50 amp fuse, and so far it's been working good. But I suspect that's because I haven't really pushed this thing in the middle of a Las Vegas summer again. Here you can see the extra thick wiring that I had to use to kind of rewire my whole power system from the alternator to the battery. There's more of it here. And what this was 2-gauge welding wire that I got from Airgas. Seemed to work pretty good. Again, here you can see that's the fan blade. That's the edge of it there. And I did have a minor, proximity issue there. You can see this is still very close to this fan blade. I can slide my whole finger in there, so I don't fear that it's going to come into contact, but I did have to zip tie this vacuum line up out of the way to the upper radiator hose. As far as how they work, well, you can see this is the main computer, the brain of the system. This thing tells the fans either to kick on when the air conditioning turns on or when the temperature reaches its set point. I'm pretty sure this came set from the factory at about 185, and I've just left it there because it seems to work pretty good. Here you can see the temperature probe, which came with my kit, and this probe tells that little brain what temperature it is, and at about 185 degrees, the fans will kick on. Okay, so here we're looking at the air conditioning compressor, and you can see I had to use this tap to tap into one of the lines so that the computer knows when this compressor turns on, the fans will kick on. So just to recap that, there are two instances when these fans will kick on. Number one, temperature, and you can adjust that set point. And number two is going to be when that air conditioning clutch kicks on. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this thing up and I can show you them in action. So you can see here, my temperature gauge is very low. The truck is still cold, so the fans are not gonna kick on, and I do not have my air conditioning on. And because of that, the fans are not on. However, if I wanna kick the fans on, I'll just go ahead and kick my air conditioning on. And now we can see the fans have kicked on and are doing their job. Here we have an instance where the clutch turned off and the fans turned off. And as soon as that clutch kicks back on, those fans will kick right back on too. And there you go. Okay, so let me point out one other issue that I'm having. My air conditioning head unit is malfunctioning. And what that means is this knob here that gets used all the time actually ends up messing up. You can see it's off, and you can see these lights kind of flickering, kicking on and off. What's happening when these lights are flickering is the clutch on the air conditioner is engaging, which is also engaging the fans. So what I have to do is just kind of fiddle with this a little bit to get that system to shut off, or just buy a new air conditioning head unit. But again, that adds to the cost. And of course, the fans would also kick on once the computer reads the set point on that probe. So what have we learned here? Well, I hope that I'm able to convey to you that electric fans are not for everyone. They are not a simple install, they are not cheap, they are not a simple quick fix for something like I thought they were. They do present a lot of problems that you didn't know you were gonna have. They are something that you're constantly going to be working on and trying to get right and making sure that, this is right and that's right and the wiring is correct, and you get the point. However, some of you may love that. Some of you may be dying to have electric fans in your vehicle for all of the benefits, for the added cooling, for the added horsepower and torque gains, and because you simply just like tinkering on your vehicle, kind of like me. So while I am still very happy with these electric fans because they do work awesome, they sound awesome, they look awesome, and it definitely is a conversation point, I just don't think they are for everyone. All right, guys, well, I'll leave you with this. if you absolutely must put electric fans in your car, I would say first try a single electric fan, either brand new or from the junkyard, something you can get cheap. You know, figure out how to wire that thing, maybe get a friend that's good with electrical stuff, and try it out. If that fits the bill, if that works for you and does what you want it to do, maybe consider upgrading to a full electric fan system like I have, taking out your clutch fan and going from there, because that's not going to be it. You're going to have to do a lot of other things to your vehicle to get everything to work properly, and that might be fun to you, but for most people I'm suspecting that that's not. All right guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned maybe something from it. I really wanted to make a few good points for electric fans, but also give you the reality of the situation. In my case, like I said, I'll be keeping these in for now, but that's not to rule out that I may be removing them later on. I can see one good way to fix this system so that I really wouldn't have to worry about it anymore, and that is simply to get a much more expensive, much higher powered alternator. But again, those don't come cheap. I mean, I'm talking $350 plus for a new alternator. So being that this is kind of my project car right now, it's my third vehicle, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it as is, and you never know, I might go ahead and throw a bigger alternator in there and get this thing working properly. Anyways guys, if you wanna see more, please follow me on Instagram at One Road Garage. You can also check out my website, oneroadgarage.com. But until then, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe, hit the little bell, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks guys, peace out.